Clooney and Muslim wife launch all-out war on conservatives. Look who they just gave $1 million to. George Clooney and his wife Amal Clooney have donated $1 million to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has been accused of incorrectly labeling conservative groups as hate groups. It's reported that the hefty donation to the SPLC stemmed from watching events unfold in Charlottesville, where far-left and far-right groups clashed in violence, with the day ending with 3 fatalities. The Southern Poverty Law Center is said to be a United States non-profit organization that keeps a watchful eye on domestic hate groups and extremists. The problem with the group is that they have seemingly been criticized for their unfair bias towards conservative groups or groups with conservative values. Having conservative values doesn't mean someone is an extremist or part of a domestic hate group. There can be people in hate groups who have conservative values, but that does not mean conservatives, in general, are hateful. The same can be said for liberals. If there's a liberal in a hate group, then does that mean all liberals are hateful? The answer is no. It must be fair and equal on both sides. Simply being liberal or conservative does not require you to join hate or extremist groups. Perhaps that's something the Southern Poverty Law Center needs to do some professional development on. If they're constantly accused of being biased towards conservative values, then they're doing something wrong. The actor and his lawyer wife want to help provide funding for a group who is supposedly keeping watch on groups which create violence, but there's a conflict with the SPLC. The organization's alleged bias towards conservatives might create a blind eye towards groups like Antifa and the far right. If the SPLC reviews recent events in protester history, at least over the last 8 months, then they would notice a startling trend that doesn't bode well for leftists. There's a deep-rooted history of far-left protesters being the source of violence and attempting to stifle free speech events. They're exercising their right to free speech by interrupting the rights of others' free speech. The far left often shows up at events, in protest, and violence almost always breaks out into chaotic scenes reminiscent of a movie. If the Southern Poverty Law Center wants to make a difference, then they cannot hold bias towards any group, and they must pinpoint the direct cause of most violence and hate groups. Sadly, for liberals, that might point to the far left. There's constantly violent activity by members of Antifa and Black Lives Matter on television, but not so much from the far right. The far right had an event called Unite the Right, which featured a weird presentation of tiki torches that mimicked activity from a cult-like horror film. Regardless of how weird it appeared, they were not fighting with anyone. Then busloads of Antifa and a sprinkle of Black Lives Matter showed up, and the clashes resulted in 3 people losing their life in Charlottesville. One doesn't need to support the far right or far left in order to understand that whoever shows up to the event second, bringing their aggressive protests, is always the source of the violence. Actor George Clooney and his human rights lawyer wife, Amal Clooney, donated $1 million to a group that has been accused of mislabeling conservative organizations as hate groups. A statement released by the couple said the donation was in response to the violent protests in Charlottesville, Virginia. Reuters describes the Southern Poverty Law Center as a U.S. nonprofit that monitors extremists in domestic hate groups, but their methodology has been criticized widely for being unfairly biased against groups with conservative values. What happened in Charlottesville, and what is happening in communities across our country, demands our collective engagement to stand up to hate, the Clooneys said in the statement. In July, the SPLC labeled a prominent Christian nonprofit organization as a hate group because it sought to defend Christian values. The label was reported by ABC News, which then faced a torrent of criticism over the misleading characterization. In December, the SPLC was criticized for excluding racial epithets and crimes against white people in their list of hate crimes. Richard Cohen, the president of the Southern Poverty Law Center, thanked the couple for standing with us at this critical moment in our country's fight against hate. Clooney has raised millions for Democratic causes and politicians, including Hillary Clinton, but even he admitted that he was uneasy with how much money was spent on political campaigns. "I think it's ridiculous that we should have this kind of money in politics," he said in April last year. There's a woman from Black Lives Matter who went viral for posting something quite absurd, almost borderline hateful, and maybe the SPLC needs to look into her. The Black Lives Matter leader demands 10 things from white people and that should be taken into consideration because she is targeting white people specifically. If she said people, then it wouldn't be a big deal. It would just be a list of demands opposed to a list of demands from a group they apparently don't like too much. To read a quote stating that the SPLC overlooked hateful comments towards white people means they are completely biased. White people can't help who they were born as. No one has the ability to pick their parents or their color. If they could, then we would all be George Clooney's kid and share his millions. Not me. I'd be his neighbor and steal his wife, then his money, and then send him to Hollywood's unemployment line. He can stand next to Colin Kaepernick and they can treat each other to lunch on their EBT card. If the Southern Poverty Law Center wants to be taken seriously, then they need to take themselves seriously. There's no room for bias if their job is keeping an eye on hate groups. There's hate in every shape, size, and color. Thank you for watching this video. What do you think about this? Share this on Facebook and Twitter along with your comments.